Daniel. And someone may ask, why are we studying Daniel? What's the point of prophecy? Okay, why is it so important to, look back? Because we're going to look at Daniel 8 today. But I want to start in 2 Peter. So go to 2 Peter. Because sometimes, like the chapter we're going to read right now, okay, talks about goats and, like some weird things, and you're like, what is that? What's the point of that? It's like goats and rams and one horn and two horns, and you're like all confused, Well, it's not, by the time we finish, it's not going to be confusing, but you kind of sometimes think is, what's the point of that? Okay? Mm-hmm. So go to the end of 2 Peter, 2 Peter 3. And if someone can read verses 1 to 3. So 2 Peter 3, verses 1 to 3.
Dear friends, this is now my second letter to you. I have written both of them as reminders to stimulate you to wholesome thinking. I want you to recall the words spoken in the past by the holy prophets and the command given by our Lord and Savior through your apostles. And 3.
Yes.
Above all, you must understand that in the last days, scoffers will come, scoffing and following their own evil desires.
Okay. So he goes, I want you to be stirred up, okay? To have this stirring up of your minds. For what? Okay? For the old prophets, okay? For those prophets that said words about my second coming, okay? So he goes, be mindful of the words which were spoken before by the holy prophets, and the commandments of us, and of the commandment of us, the apostles. Why? Because how many of you hear scoffers? Yeah, is Jesus really going to come back? Okay? Is this real? You think you remember in Noah's days, they were playing, having fun, until the door was shut. Did they ever believe Noah while he's building for years the ark? No. Why? Because they're thinking that Noah is an idiot. He's building an ark in the middle of a desert, thinking that there is rain that's going to come and carry a boat. It's like you think, that doesn't sound like anything logical, So they were scoffing, right? Until the door is shut. They realized Noah wasn't joking. God was very serious in what he was saying. Same thing happens now. Same thing exactly is happening now. People are saying, you think the world is going to end? Well, how is that? And then there is denominations that says, all of this revelation, the fire is coming and God destroying this, and that's all metaphorical. Mm-hmm. That's never going to happen. Mm-hmm. Okay? Did you forget that what happened in the Red Sea? Did you forget what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah? Was this also metaphorical, or was it real? Okay? Why is this going to be real? And what happens in Revelation is going to be metaphorical. Mm-hmm. Why? Because we don't want to see that. People that don't know the Lord don't want to see that. Because that means judgment. And it's like, that's not the God, no judgment. Okay? That's why we're studying Daniel. Because we want to stir up our minds to say, you know what? God is giving us the hints of, hey, this is coming. Okay? Now, is anyone going to be here? Anyone planning to be here? No. But what's our job? Our job is to prepare others, to say, hey, Jesus is coming. Jesus is coming. So, and that's what Daniel is going to be. So now let's go to Daniel 8. So an overview, Daniel 7 gave us an overview of what's going to happen from where Daniel was all the way to the millennial reign of Christ. Okay? That's Daniel 7. Daniel 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 is going to break down parts of this. So he's going to take a part of it, a vision, that's going to take part of that big vision that he gave in Daniel 7. So it's kind of like, when you have a big picture, and then now I'm going to focus on this part of the picture. And now I'm going to focus on that part. Okay? And so on. That's what you're going to see in the rest of Daniel. So you're kind of understanding. So you're going to see Daniel go back to the Greeks' empire. and the Medo-Persian Empire in the beginning of the chapter. You know when you hear about people like Napoleon and Hitler, because those are recent, okay? Those are all examples of and have part of the Antichrist. These are examples. This is God's way of saying, believe me, when someone is demonic, they can do anything. This is God's way of saying, you don't think an Antichrist is going to come and be like that? Why don't you watch this person? Why don't you watch that person? And then you have these ones in history, okay, that you can point to and say, wow, I couldn't believe that a human being is capable of killing 6 million people. Okay? Yeah. Now we're going to see a guy in that chapter. His name is Antiochus IV, or Antiochus Epiphanes. Okay? He was a Greek ruler. And you're going to hear things that will say, oh my gosh, can a human being do that? Yes. This is not even the Antichrist. This is an example of an Antichrist. Okay? With me so far?
Yes.
Okay, go to Daniel 8. And let's read, someone read the first verse.
In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first.
Okay. Who's King Belshazzar? Who remembers?
Nebuchadnezzar's grandson.
Exactly. Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, which means back in the Babylonian. Okay? So this is about 15 years before the Medo-Persian Empire. Okay? So in the 3rd year of that king, he saw this vision that we're going to see.
So,
And it,
question. So,
yes.
So the Babylonian Empire, and then came
the Medo-Persians.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alright.
Yeah. So basically, if you read on yourself, by yourself, Daniel, the first 6 chapters is the story of Daniel. So the actual story of Daniel ends at chapter 6. The next 6 chapters, Daniel goes back into those days when he served, and he goes, you know that year? I had a vision. Let me show you what vision I had on that year. Okay? Do you know that year? I had another vision. Okay? That's what Daniel is doing. So Daniel's story actually ended in chapter 6. But here, he goes, in the 1st year of Belshazzar, I had this vision. In the 3rd year of Belshazzar, I had that vision. Okay? That's kind of what you're seeing here. So you're not confused. Okay? Who's confused? Who's lost?
Again, he's giving them evidence of that, some of the predictions that he has that came to pass, to tell him that whatever he's about to say now is also going to be...
No, he's just saying, you know what? I got this vision in that year. You know? So while he's working in the government, because remember, Daniel was a government official, God kept giving him vision.
Right.
You know? So, like the first verse in chapter 7. Okay, let's look at the first verse in chapter 7. What does it say? In the first year. That means it's 2 years. So chapter 8 happens 2 years after 7. Right? Or if you're confused, because this is not easy. If you're confused, raise your hand and say, oh, okay, I don't know what you're talking about. Okay? So chapter 7's vision happened before, 2 years before chapter 8's vision. With me so far? Okay. So he said, appear to me, Daniel. And it's almost like you see the humility of Daniel. Because he's like, can you believe God is speaking to me? To me, Daniel. You know, I'm getting these visions. You know, God keeps such humility in his heart that he can't believe he's getting those visions. Okay. Now let's look at verse 2.
When I saw in the vision, and when I saw, I was in Susa, the capital, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in the vision, and I was at the Ulai Canal.
Awesome. So now we're seeing the location. So he got transported, okay? He was transported to a city called Shushan or Susa. So if you study history, it's called Susa or Shushan, okay? Where is that? Currently, Iran. That's where Iran is, okay? What is that? The capital of the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, the Medo-Persian Empire is going to come about 15 years after that vision that Daniel had. Okay? So Daniel was transported into the desert of a small city in the wilderness that's not well known at that moment. Okay? That's what happened with Daniel. Why? Because God is going to show him something that has to do with that city. With me?
Yes.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Verse 3.
Then I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a ram which had 2 horns was standing in front of the canal. Now the 2 horns were long, but one was longer than the other, with the longer one coming up last.
Okay. Now we're going to get into the rams and horns and interesting stuff. Okay. Then I lifted my eyes and I saw by the river a ram. Now the ram usually have 2 horns, right? It's not really unusual, you know. However, what's unusual about this is one was higher than the other, and one came up last. So basically, what he's seeing is the ram had 1 horn, and then another one came up last, and that last one came up higher. Okay? That's what he's seeing here.
Okay.
Now you ask yourself, well, what is that? Okay? But let's look at verse 4 and then we'll explain.
I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward, so that no animal could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand. But he did according to his will and became great.
Okay. So we see a ram who became great. He extended in 3 directions. What's the direction that is not here?
East.
East. Think about it. Okay? Because he's talking about the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire is already east. It's not going to expand east. It's going to expand in the other 3 directions because it's not going east. So Daniel is saying he's expanding northward, which means toward Europe, okay? Toward Jerusalem in the Middle East, southward toward Egypt, Sudan, okay? Not eastward because they're already east, okay? But became so great. So what's interesting is he's talking here about the Media and Persian Empire. Because the Media Empire came when Babylon was. And then the Persian Empire came up after it. However, when the Persian Empire came up after it, it conquered the Media Empire. And it conquered the Babylonian Empire. So the one that came up last came higher, conquered everything. That's why Daniel was seeing a ram with 2 horns. The last one came up higher, the other horn came up higher than the first one. Okay? Anyone lost? Because I can explain this many ways.
Yes. So the other 2
Yes.
first empires, they combined, and then the last empire took over all of them.
Exactly. So basically the Medes kind of tried to help the Babylonians
Yeah.
at one point. Okay?
They're allies.
Exactly. And then the Persians came and basically conquered the Babylonian Empire and the Medo Empire. Okay? That's why it came up last. Okay? Now, in the vision, he actually explains it. Okay? So go to verse, same chapter. Okay? Verse 20.
The ram which you saw with the 2 horns represents the kings of Media and Persia.
So Gabriel gave him an explanation of the vision. Okay? With me?
Yes.
Okay. Let's continue. Verse 5.
As I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth, without touching the ground, and the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes.
Okay? So now we see something else. We see a goat. Okay? And that goat came from where? The west. Okay? That's interesting. And then he goes, that goat came across the surface of the earth without touching the ground. The speed of it, it almost looks like someone is not touching the ground. That's how fast that goat is coming. Okay? Then you ask yourself, what came after the Medo-Persians? The Greeks. Okay? And if you read history about Alexander the Great, you know one of the interesting stories? Okay? Alexander the Great came, this is history now, okay? Came to Jerusalem. Alexander the Great destroyed cities. Like he went into cities where he completely wiped the city, killed everyone in it. Okay? He came to Jerusalem wanting to do the same thing. You know what they did, the Jews? They showed him Daniel. They showed him that he is in the book of Daniel. And he spared Jerusalem. They showed him, this is you. And he read and he knew that the Bible is talking about him. And he spared Jerusalem from destruction because they showed him the book. Interesting story. Okay?
Smart man.
So, yeah, smart man. Yeah, exactly. Hey, Alexander, look at you here. Okay? So let's continue. So he goes the high speed without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. One horn or two horns? One. Okay? Now, does the goat have one horn? Normally? No. It has two horns, right? Okay? Why? Because he's not talking about a normal goat here. He's talking about a particular king. So it looks like a unicorn. Because the Greek, anytime you say the Greeks, the first thing that stands in mind is Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, at 20 years old, he started conquering cities. By 33 years old, he conquered the world. At 33 years old, he conquered the whole world. Think about that. Okay? He destroyed an army, a Persian army of 300,000 with 35,000. That's Alexander the Great. And you can tell, okay, look at the next verse here. Look at verse 6. Actually, 6 and 7.
Then he came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power. And I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram, and broke his two horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand.
Listen to what it says here. He goes, and I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with what? Rage. You know why? Because for years, the Persian Empire was oppressing the Greeks. So when he got the upper hand, there was no mercy. There was only killings and destruction. That's why he was moved with rage. And he literally destroyed the Persian Empire. That's who? That's Alexander the Great. You know, that's so. And you know, go to verse 20, 21, 22. Yeah, 21 and 22.
The rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now that being broken, whereas four stood up for it, four kingdoms shall stand up out of the nations, but not in his power.
Okay. So we know who's the first king of the Greek, Alexander the Great. Very, very easy to see the vision here. And we learned from chapter 7 what happened after Alexander the Great died. A few years after, it was split into 4. Okay? So the Greek Empire divided into 4 segments. Okay? Now, the next part of the chapter is speaking about one of those segments, the Seleucids, which actually had territory of Syria. So the Syria part, okay, that's where the Seleucids were. Okay? And this is interesting. Why? Because he's going to speak about one little horn out of those, one king out of this dominion. That's what we're going to read about next. Any questions so far? What we're talking about? Okay. Is this interesting or
It's all
did I lose you?
It's really good.
Okay.
It's fire.
Okay. So let's look at verse 8. 8 and 9.
On chapter 8.
Yeah, chapter 8.
Therefore the male goat grew very great. But when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in place of it, 4 notable ones came up for the 4 winds of heaven.
Okay.
And out
Go ahead.
and out of one of them came a little horn which grew exceedingly great, towards the south, towards the east, towards the glorious land, and it grew.
Let's stop there. So out of the one, so we discussed the 4 segments that it was divided into. Out of the one, which is the Seleucids, which is the one that owned and ruled over Syria, okay, came a little horn. Now don't confuse the little horn here with the little horn from chapter 7, because we talked about this before. The little horn from chapter 7 was the Antichrist, was out of the Roman Empire, was the end. Okay, this is out of the Greek Empire. Okay, that's why I kept saying, when God is telling you, oh, hey, there is an Antichrist. Okay,
Can you repeat that?
yeah. So chapter 7,
Right.
the little horn, which is the Antichrist, is gonna come out of the Roman Empire.
Right.
Okay, remember the European Union when we discussed it. Okay, here it's coming out of the Greek Empire, not the Roman. Okay, because remember, Alexander the Great dies, the Greeks split into 4, and now he's gonna talk about a king out of that empire.
Okay.
With me?
Yes.
Okay.
So we've agreed that the horns means kingdoms? Or
Dominion, someone who has a kingdomship and dominion. Okay, so even Christ, the horn, it means he has the ruler, ruler and dominion. That's what the horns, speaks of in the Bible. So anytime you see that word, okay. Here it's interesting. He goes, he grew exceedingly great toward the south. South of Syria is Egypt and other parts, right? That's south. So he conquered the south. He conquered the east of Syria, which is Iran, Iraq, okay? And then he moved to what? The glorious land, which is what? Jerusalem, okay? Remember, the whole Bible here is going back to what? Jerusalem. So the story has to go back to the Israelites, okay? Or else he wouldn't be going through all of this history, track to just tell us, okay, there is the empires. Great. Well, okay, what does this have to do with Jerusalem? What does it have to do with Israel? Nothing. No, there is. Okay. So he went to the glorious land. And remember, it always starts with a little horn. You know what's interesting? Is no one is going to be a destructive king or ruler. And until the beginning, he's going to start with a very humble beginning. Very humble.
Like Hitler.
Exactly. Exactly. If you study Hitler, exactly. They never going to come out and say, hey, I'm going to destroy all of you. No, they're not going to do that. Okay? They're going to come out like in peace and, let's kind of get people together and harmonize and whatever. And then all of a sudden, a turn happens. And you see what really is inside, which is rage and violence and destruction. That's why he's always calling those little horn, because they're never going to start big. They're going to start little. Okay? Okay, verse 10.
And it grew up to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground, and trampled them.
Okay. Starts growing now. So it's not a little horn anymore. Okay? It grew up to what? The host of heaven. Well,
really, really high.
yeah, so he cannot be talking about angels here.
Yeah.
Okay? Cannot be talking about angels, because what does this have to do with angels? Okay? And it cast down some of those hosts? No. I think no matter how big the ruler is, it's not going to cast out angels. Okay? So he cannot be talking about angels. Okay? So we need to compare, okay, how is that compared to other scripture in the Bible? So go to Daniel 12. Daniel 12, verse 3. So we're going to look at a couple of scripture here that kind of open this up. What does it say? Daniel 12, verse 3.
Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness, like the stars forever and ever.
Okay. So he's talking about
Wise.
God's people. Okay. So those who serve God would be like stars forever and ever. Okay. Because those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament. And those who turn away many to righteousness like the stars. Okay. So he's talking about people, not angelic beings. Okay. Now there is another reason we can.
Good.
Wait,
Yes.
this story is it between Malachi and Matthew? Maccabees?
Well, this
Maccabees, right?
exactly.
This story in
So
Maccabees.
this is happening actually 175 BC, okay, to about 164 BC, which is during the end of Malachi. You know, they tell you there is a 400-year silence between the Old Testament and the New Testament.
Yeah.
The Bible is silent. The world is not silent. There is a lot of things happening in the world, but the Bible doesn't say much. This is happening in that time period. So Daniel 8 is happening in the time period between Malachi and Matthew and Jesus coming. Great question, Fabian. Okay? Go to Genesis. Go to Genesis 30. Joseph's dream. Genesis 33. Genesis 37. Sorry. Genesis 37. Yeah, we know Joseph had a dream, right? Okay.
A lot of them.
Who remembers what kind of a dream is
The
it? When
loaves, the wheat loaves of the 12 loaves was his brother.
yeah, and the other one.
And the cows.
Brothers, like the stars bow to one.
Okay. Go to Genesis 37.
That's
Okay. Verse 9. Let's look at verse 9 to 10.
Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?
Okay. What is he talking about here? The Israelites. He's saying all of you are going to bow down. All of the tribes are going to bow down to me, which actually happened. Okay. But he's saying the dream was the stars, the moon, the stars, the sun are bowing down to me. Okay. Who's the stars? The tribes of Israel. And that really explains confusion. Okay. So I'm going to give you kind of a side thing here. Okay. Go to Revelation. Just kind of because this one has a lot of confusion of what is this? Revelation 12. Revelation 12. Look at verse 1 and 2.
A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth.
Okay. Who's that? No?
12 tribes?
Israel.
Okay. Who's that?
Israel.
Israel. Israel. This is the nation of Israel. Jesus came out of the nation of Israel. Okay? And that's why she had to run to the desert. There's no story where Mary had to run. She didn't have to run to the desert to hide. Okay? Here, he's saying they had to run to the desert to hide. He's talking about, remember in Genesis, okay? That the sun, the moon, and the 12 stars are going to bow down to me. And here he brings it up. He goes, I saw a woman with 12 stars, okay? 12 tribes. And then there is a child. You know how many times in history Satan knew that Jesus is going to come from the Jewish descent. He knew that. You know how many times in history he tried to kill all the Jews? At least 5 times. At least 5 times Satan tried to kill all the Jews. Remember the story of Esther?
Yes.
What did Haman try to do? Kill all the Jews. Okay? You know who's doing that? It's not Haman. It's Satan. Because he knew that if he kills all the Jews, what's going to happen to Jesus? He can't come. Because he's going to come from a Jewish descent. Okay? So you don't know how many times he was like, if I can destroy all the Jews, then I have foiled God's plan. Because he knew that, because it's written in the Bible. You know, he knew that. So the woman here, he's speaking about the Jews and the persecution. Yes, he tried to kill the Jews multiple times, okay, to try to foil God's plan. That's a side note. Okay? Go back to Daniel.
That's good.
Okay. You're with me or...
Oh, we're with you.
Okay?
Yeah.
One is on fire.
Oh, you are.
Okay. So we understand now that the attacks that we're seeing is against who? Against God's people. Okay? That's the host that he's talking about here. Okay? Verse 11 in Daniel 8. So go back to Daniel 8. Verse 11.
It became great, even as great as the prince of the host, and the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown.
He became so great that he started attacking the prince of the host. Who's that? God. Okay? So I want you to listen to some of the things that he did. Okay? So he started basically in 175 BC. Okay? And then he removed the high priest at that moment. Okay? He put his own high priest. And his name was a Greek name, Jason. Okay? The old priest name was Onias. He removed that high priest. Okay? How important the high priest to a Jew? Very important, right? That's all the religion. Yes.
Wasn't Jason the brother of Judah? Wasn't he Hebrew, Jewish?
He was a Hebrew, but he gave him a Greek name, basically. Yeah. So he was a Hebrew, but he gave him a Greek name to change his identity. Because he's actually now going to control the priesthood. Okay? So one of the things he did, how bad is it to sacrifice a pig to a Jew? Think about it. Think about it. Okay?
A what? A pig?
A pig. A pig.
Oh, pig. Yes.
Okay.
Son upon.
He sacrifices a pig on the altar. He cut it out and he made the priest eat the pig and drink the blood.
Wow.
Okay? That's one of the things. His name is Antiochus the Fourth or Antiochus Epiphany. Okay? That's his name. Now, listen to some of the things he did. He builds an Olympic stadium. You know, the Greeks were big on Olympics, right?
Yeah.
Okay? The only problem is the Greeks played the Olympics basically naked. Where did he build that? Right on the outside of the Holy of Holies. Wow. Okay? And here is the thing. Satan's always plan is to do what? To mix worldly with God's stuff. And you know what? He's doing exactly the same thing now. He wants the world to get into the church to the point where you cannot tell the difference anymore. Okay? That's always enemy's plan. The enemy's plan is, if I can mix the two, I control what happens. So listen to what some of the things he did. So one of the things he did that Olympic stadium. Okay? He stopped circumcision. So you cannot circumcise. And if a woman circumcises a child, okay, the child is killed while the woman is hanging on to that child. So that she had to hold her child while they killed the child.
Wow.
Okay? He put the Greek culture in the temple. which means he changed everybody's name to Greek. He disallowed and burned all of God's books. There is no commandments. There is no Bible. Okay? Only the Greek culture. Some of these things you can actually read on in like First Maccabean, Second Maccabean, which is apocryphal books. You can read, this. He put a statue of himself in the temple. He put a statue of Zeus in the temple to be worshipped. He canceled the Sabbath. He canceled all religious activity.
It's crazy how Zeus is very similar to like the father too. In their like
in the pagan, yeah. They discovered 126 coins that goes back to Antiochus Epiphanes. The coins are inscribed like this: Theos Antiochus, Theos Epiphany, which means Antiochus, God manifest. By the way, this is only an example of the Antichrist. This is not the Antichrist. This is only an example of who the Antichrist is in a smaller scale. Okay? What the Antichrist is going to do is exactly the same thing. Okay? He's going to come in a very peaceful way. He's going to turn on the Jews. He's going to cancel the sacrifices, exactly the same, just on a bigger scale. So that gives you an idea, okay? In one day, I thought this was unbelievable. When he put the statue of himself in there, the Jews refused to bow down. In one day, he killed 40,000 Jews. In one day. Because they refused to bow down to the statue in the temple. And it's interesting, the statue is not outside. He didn't do like Nebuchadnezzar, where he put a statue outside and he goes, okay, worship it. Okay? No. He put the statue in the temple. That's what I'm saying is the issue of compromising. And what's interesting is, I encourage you to read Malachi. It's only a 4-chapter book. You can read it in, half hour. You're going to realize how open the Jews were to compromise. So it's not happening where the Jews are on fire for God and this happens. No. The Jews in Malachi was so compromising, they were bored with the religion. They were doing their own thing anyway. So God allowed this delusion to come in during that time because they were already compromising. Okay?
Do you know how Atticus killed those 40,000 Jews?
How it?
Do you know how he killed those 40,000 Jews?
No, but you can look it up and come and tell me.
Okay.
I'm quite sure it's quite horrific in the way, he acted on his, will to kill. Okay? Let's continue. Verse 12.
Because of the transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices. And he cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and prospered.
That's what we're talking about. So he canceled sacrifice. You can't do anything religious. And he cast down the truth. He burned all the books that talks about the law of the Lord. And he prospered in everything. Okay? Verse 13.
Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot?
We always say how long, right? How long? And here's the thing. That's what is awesome about our God. Is there is always an end. There's always a time limit. Like when he spoke to the church in Revelation, he goes, and you will be persecuted for 10 days. Okay? There is always a limit. God always puts an end. God always has a limit. And you know what? He has a limit to whatever we go through, right? It's not a never ending. So when we go through trials, when we go through tribulation, there is a limit. It cannot cross that limit. So here he is asking, well, how long? And then we get to a remarkable verse, verse 14.
He said to me, it will take 2,300 evenings and mornings.
Okay.
Then the sanctuary will be reconsecrated.
How many days?
2,300.
Okay. That's how many years? Who's good in math?
7 years.
Huh?
7 or 8
Let me
years.
guess.
6 years. 6 years. Morning and evening means it's one day. Okay? So 2,300 days is 6 years. Now listen to this. Until when? So that what's the end of those days is what's going to happen? The sanctuary is cleansed, which means Antiochus is dead and they cleanse the temple. Okay? That's the sanctuary. This happened December 25th, 165 BC. It is called Hanukkah.
Yeah.
That's Hanukkah.
Yeah.
Okay? So when the Jews celebrate Hanukkah, who knows the story of Hanukkah? Yes. Go ahead.
So the guy Maccabee leading the rebellion was Judah. Maccabee,
Judas
one of
Maccabeus.
the 3 brothers,
Uh-huh.
and they were hidden in a hill, right, in the mountain, and then they kept sending a bunch of people to fight him, and he kept destroying all of them, and then eventually they got crushed by Judah, and he got everybody around him.
December 25th, 165 BC. Okay? And what's interesting, you know Hanukkah, they do 8 days of, you light the menorah, right? You know why is it 8 days? Because when the temple was cleansed, okay, they only had oil for 1 day. So they prayed to the Lord, and the only way to get more oil was going to take 8 days. So they prayed for the Lord, and the Lord miraculously kept the light on for 8 days using that 1 day worth of oil. That's why they celebrate Hanukkah for 8 days. That's that holiday, So that's the story is right here. It has to do with Maccabeus, who actually came down, cleansed the temple. Now you say, okay, so now we know the end of it. How about 6 years before? 6 years before will be September 6, 171 BC.
It's like wintertime.
Okay? Not what it's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. September 6, 171 BC. That's 2,370 days. That's the time period when the high priest changed.
Wow. That's crazy. That's crazy.
2,370 days.
That's crazy.
Now you think if God can control, okay? Think about that. If God tells Daniel hundreds of years, we're talking about hundreds of years here,
Yeah.
okay? Before it actually happened, to the day of what's going to happen. Now come and tell me, God doesn't know what's happening in your life
Yeah.
by hour?
Yeah.
If he can actually tell what happens in history that controls kingdoms, okay, to the day of what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And then we kind of sit and think, God doesn't know what I'm going through. God rules in the kingdom of man.
Yes.
God rules in the kingdom of man. It doesn't matter what you go through. God knows. God has put an end to it. Yes, one.
It's crazy to me because I'm looking at the commentators on mines, and to add on to the feast, the Jews celebrated this, and John, the commentator said to go to John chapter 2:23. How it says like on that day was the feast of dedication in Jerusalem, and it was winter, and Jesus walked through the temple of Solomon's porch. Then the Jews surrounded him and said to him, "How long do you keep us in doubt? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly." It's crazy how how it's
Absolutely.
two in
Absolutely. Okay. Here is the thing. when he's saying all of the story, okay, he's saying it to who? This story is said to who? Daniel, right? Where is Daniel at? Where is Daniel at? Babylon, right? Remember, this is a vision of Daniel sitting in Babylon, right? He's what? Captive, right? He's captive for 7 years. He's under the control of an empire. He's away from his homeland. His homeland is destroyed. And God is coming to tell him what? I'm still in control. I'm still on the throne. Even though you're where you're at now. Let me show you. Let me show you what I'm doing. Let me show you Shushan, okay? That's not even there yet. However, I will show you that it's going to be this. And it's going to be the capital of this. And this is going to happen. God is in control even when we feel it's out of control. God is in control even when we feel everything is out of control. It's not.
Amen.
God knows it by hour, by minute. And there comes judgment. There comes victory. It will happen. Right now, you may be sitting here thinking, no way. You know what Daniel was thinking? No way. No way. Can't happen. Look at where I'm at. God is saying 2,370 days. It will happen. That's what I want you to leave tonight. Is leave tonight saying, you know what? I have a God who doesn't only control, what we think he controls. He didn't only save and redeemed us and forgave us. No. He controls everything to the minute. To the minute. I want to end as we're going to take communion. Go to John. John chapter 14. John chapter 14. Jesus said, these things I have, verse 25, these things I have spoken to you while being present with you. But the Helper, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, he will teach you all things and bring you remembrance all things that I said to you. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble. You will have tribulation. But be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. I have overcome the world. So yes, in this world there is trouble. In this world there is tribulation. But as we take communion, I want you to know that at the cross he gave me that peace.